The time continuum has been disrupted, creating this new temporal event sequence resulting in this alternate reality.
World passes away. Together we shall forge a new one. Those who oppose me shall perish through my agents of destruction. From the ashes of this world, I will build a better one. And let chaos cleanse the world. I am as far beyond mutants as they are beyond you. I am the rocks of the eternal shore. Crash against me and be broken!
Hello there gang, and welcome to another episode of Displaying-Model-Behaviour, and today we are going to go through one of the most epic stories that Marvel ever put to paper. It is the Age of Apocalypse. I said that when we hit 40,000 subscribers I was going to do a whopper episode, and I wasn't kidding. So we are going to go through the entire saga, including all the action figures that came from it, various video game or cartoon tie-ins. We're going to cover everything. I'm going to be as thorough as I can be. So let's not stand on ceremony, Mr. Wayne. Let's talk about it. So to kick things off, we have to go back to decide how it was that we got here, and that of course is all down to David Haller, the son of Professor Charles Xavier. He wakes up one morning and decides, you know what, I missed Father's Day, I want to do something for my dear old dad. I want to make the world a better place for him. And he decides that the only way to do that is to go back in time and take out the one person who he considers responsible for the most amount of hardship in Professor Xavier's life, and that's his former friend, Eric Magnus Lencher, aka Magneto.
We are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter.
He reckons that if Magneto was not there to cause all the disruption between humans and mutants, Professor X would have been able to fulfill his dream. So he goes back in time, he confronts Magneto, who at that moment is actually with the young Professor Xavier, and as he goes to put a psychic knife through the head of Magneto, Charles, being the benevolent good person that he is, jumps in the way and takes the psychic bullet for Eric. And as you can imagine, as Doc Brown has taught us, this causes a total causality thing. I shouldn't have quoted Back to the Future, I couldn't remember what it was exactly.
God.
Legion gets blipped out of reality because Professor Xavier never had kids. And also, he never formed the X-Men and never did a whole bunch of other good stuff. And because of that, the world turned pretty dark, pretty quick. Now, during this whole brouhaha, the X-Men had actually travelled back in time as well to try and stop Legion from doing this, and they all got blipped out of reality as well. So we begin this new timeline, the Age of Apocalypse. But there is one X-Man who wasn't affected by this, or was affected differently at least, and that was Bishop, because Bishop is already time displaced. So he's kind of out of whack already. So he doesn't get blipped out of reality. We'll go back to him later. But now we have this new world where Apocalypse, seeing that there's a sooner, earlier opportunity to enact his plan of survival of the fittest, he comes out of his slumber and decides it's time to take over the world, baby. And he does with brutal efficiency. And what's really cool is that there's a lot of stuff that they don't go too deep into, but kind of mirrors the real world in some ways as well. Because Apocalypse comes to power and takes over North America. And when I first started reading Age of Apocalypse, I thought, oh, this post-apocalyptic, awful world, this is the entire world. And it's not entirely. It's North America where Apocalypse is based, and then he's trying to exert his reach throughout the world. But we get different politicians and different countries trying to enact all these pacts and agreements and things to try and limit the power of this mad dictator Apocalypse. And it's really cool to see how that unfolds. And to do that, we're going to kick things off with X-Men Age of Apocalypse Alpha. I almost forgot what comic I was about to cover there. So, the scene opens setting the world we're living in beautifully as Bishop is climbing and crawling over a giant mountain of human skulls. Very Terminator 2. Very awesome. And of course, the bright, popping, manga-type artwork is a great juxtaposition to the story being told. It's a grim, nasty story, but with bright, colourful 90s artwork. I love that. I really do. So Bishop is still trying to be a hero, and he's trying to rescue this young girl who's running away from some impending danger. What is that? It's Apocalypse's Infinities. They're his foot soldiers, and they do look pretty wicked. Funnily enough, we've never got any action figures of these guys, but I think that the General Infinity Shock Trooper actually looks a lot like an old Doombot toy that came out in a Fantastic Four line way back in the early 2000s. Those are worth a fortune now, but if you could army build those, you'd have some wicked Infinity troops. So Bishop doesn't have to go it alone against these guys because we get our introduction to the new X-Men in the Age of Apocalypse, headed up by none other than Magneto. So that's kind of a great swerve to start the story with. The former enemy of Charles Xavier is now the man who stands up for his dream. Not so much supporting human and mutant coexistence, but basically just trying to save both species as well as he can do, because now there is this unifying force of Apocalypse that just wants to essentially not wipe everyone out, but clash everyone against each other and put the entire world through as much hardship as he can do in order to promote the survival of the fittest. And Magneto's X-Men team, oh, they're badass. They're so badass. So we get a great throwdown, and at one point it would seem that the leader of the Infinities almost has the drop on Magneto because he's got a plastic gun to his head and he's like, what you gonna do now, pal? Your magnetism powers ain't gonna help you. And then suddenly it starts to get a little bit freezy and a little bit frosty for him, and all of a sudden he ices over and shatters like the T-1000, another Terminator reference. And we see that in this reality, Iceman, he ain't taking no prisoners. And of course, after this, Magneto's like, it was no problem. I knew Iceman was going to step up there and make the save, and he did.
Of course!
Then when Bishop sees Magneto, he flips out, and he's like, God, it's all your fault! And he runs at him, and then Magneto, exhibiting a really cool power that I hadn't seen him do before, essentially just goes, sleep. And Bishop just passes out, and his X-Men are like, whoa, that was, what'd you do there? And Magneto says how he actually slowed the flow of iron in his blood so it couldn't get to his brain and he passed out. Kind of like a UFC sleeper hold, but with magnets. Magnets, bitch! So that was kind of awesome, and also plants the seed for something we're going to see in Age of Apocalypse Omega, but we're going to get to that a long time from now. And before we leave this scene, Sabretooth says to Magneto, did you recognize that dude? Because Bishop is saying, Xavier, murder, your fault. And Magnus does have this moment of pause that clearly Victor Creed can see. And he's like, whoa, hey, okay, what are you not telling us? But Magneto plays it off. He's like, nah, I've never seen this dude in my life. But a little part of him recognizes Bishop from 20 years ago when Charles was killed in front of him. Now we flash over to a real fun scene. We are introduced to the Dark Beast. Hank McCoy he's taken a turn for the worst in this reality. He is now the dark grey, horrible, psychotic, manipulating genes mad scientist. Basically, he's the Dark Beast. That sentence went on forever, but I promised myself I wasn't going to do retakes, otherwise I'll be here literally forever. He's the Dark Beast, and he is bad to the bone, and we see him experimenting on Frederick J. Duke's The Blob. And this is what I love about Age of Apocalypse. You get these one-page and one-panel little cameos from all these different characters, and you see what's befallen them in this horrible world. So he's running all these horrible experiments on the Blob, when the Blob is like, you know what? I've had enough of this now, and he breaks out of his restraints, and he lunges for the Beast. And Alex Summers is there too, and he's like, whoa, he shouldn't be moving that quickly. What did you do to him? Luckily for both of them, before the blob can crush them, he's absolutely obliterated by an optic blast coming from one Scott Summers. So we get this trio here now, and it's like, okay, so 3 quintessentially good guys are now working for Apocalypse. They're on the side of villainy. What is going on here? And we instantly establish a huge sibling rivalry between Havoc and Cyclops. And we also notice that Cyclops is missing one of his eyes, living up to his name as he should do. This is an awesome backstory that we never actually see properly told, but we do learn about it. Cyclops lost his eye at the claws of Wolverine. At one point back in the past, Jean Grey was taken prisoner by Apocalypse. Magneto refused to send a team to rescue her as it was too dangerous, so Wolverine left the X-Men to go and rescue her on his own, and in doing so, took out the eye of Cyclops and also lost his hand. But more on that later. So the two Summers brothers bicker over whose fault this was, and Scott has a moment to chastise the Beast, saying that he should not be doing any genetic manipulation and tampering because of the Kelly Pact. And again, this is a really cool kind of real world sort of thing, where even though Apocalypse is launching this war against the rest of the world is still trying to use politics and embargoes and all these different things to try and keep him in check. So that's why we have the Kelly Pact, which Apocalypse has, I guess, kind of turned up to Parliament and been like, oh yes, alright, the Kelly Pact, if we can keep our trade agreements, I won't conduct any genetic manipulation experiments. It's kind of cool throwing that all in there. It's pretty awesome. So Havoc continues to really lay into his brother, and you see there's a real Bret Hart-Owen Hart sibling rivalry kind of thing here. Havoc is very much the bitter little brother who's jealous of his taller, more powerful, and probably more virile big brother. But before they can really get at it, their mentor, Sinister, shows up. Again, like, what on earth is happening? I love it. Sinister shows up, and he tells the two boys that, hey, there's no time for fighting, I gotta go and have a word with Cyclops. You know, my favorite. And he tells Scott that Scott has to kind of take charge of things for a while because he's going to go and take care of some plans of his own. He's going on a little sabbatical. Can't tell you what's happening, but peace out. I'll see you around. Now it's time to check in on another one of the original X-Men, Warren Worthington. Funnily enough, one of the guys who has suffered the most at the hands of Apocalypse is actually doing okay in the age of Apocalypse. He's running his own nightclub called Heaven, which is a refuge for humans and mutants. Essentially, it's a safe zone where anyone can go and they won't be detected by the sentinels that fly overhead. So in Heaven, Angel is playing host and Gambit shows up and he asks him to arrange a meeting between him and Magneto. He's got a little plan of his own. And Angel says, okay, I owe you one from some past deals, but you gotta promise if I do this for you, y'all don't ever step foot in Heaven again. And Gambit, he's got no problem with that. Back at the X-Men's base, Rogue is spending some quality time with her son, Charles, who she has had with Magneto. Another big revelation. It turns out that Magneto knows how to counteract Rogue's powers using his magnetism. How? Not important, but he does. So they have their child, and Rogue laments that even though she's his mother, she can't actually touch him. So that's a nice little bit of tragedy, I guess. And they go to confront Bishop, who still is not actually explaining the whole situation. He's just speaking very vaguely about murder and betrayal and all that kind of thing. So clearly, in the last 20 years, and with all the timey-wimey stuff happening in his head, he's not entirely corpus mentis. So Magneto tells Rogue, hey look, you're going to have to use some psychic abilities to go into his head and find out exactly what's going on. Going back over to Apocalypse now, we get some awesome visual sights of the big guy with his horsemen. Not so much horsemen, but lieutenants in the age of Apocalypse. So it's the big dude, Apocalypse himself, then we got Sinister, we have Abyss, and we have his son, Nemesis. It was never fully confirmed that Nemesis is the son of Apocalypse, but it's always kind of assumed that that is the case. I'll call this character Nemesis just because that's his original name, and then he changed to a different one, but I don't think the YouTube algorithm, easy for me to say, I don't think it likes us using that word, so we'll just call him Nemesis. And he's in this awesome looking survival suit. He's one of the coolest looking characters in the Age of Apocalypse, because previously he was a tall, muscular, strapping, handsome, blonde-haired, blue-eyed mutant. However, he ran afoul of Magneto because he launched this big assault on the X-Men at their home base. Magneto didn't take too kindly to that, and in taking revenge, he almost killed Nemesis, but Nemesis was saved and put in this survival suit now, which contains all of his psychic, sonic energy, and now he's just this awesome looking flaming skull, and that's wicked. Not a skull, an entire skeleton, but I belabor the point. There is an awesome Toy Biz. Is it Toy Biz or early Hasbro? Regardless, there's an awesome action figure of Nemesis. It's a builder figure, very expensive, very hard to find these days, and even harder to find in good condition, because he has a helmet that you can lift up and it's on a hinge, and 9 times out of 10 that thing's broken. So if you have one that's in full working order, whew, that's a rarity right there. Maybe one of these days Hasbro will, answer the dream that I'm manifesting and give us a new version of this guy. So Apocalypse is talking to his lieutenants, and there's one missing, who's Mikhail, who we never actually see, but Apocalypse says he'll deal with him later, and he just gives them the heads up, hey, we're about to move into the next phase of our plan, which is full-on global domination. We're going to put humans and mutants against each other. We're going to make the world as miserable and awful and horrible as possible, because that's the only way we're going to bring these two races up to the next level and evolve them. That's the funny thing. Apocalypse kind of sees himself not as evil. No one does see themselves as evil. He sees himself as perhaps at least a necessary evil, because he is forcing the human race and mutants to, in video game terms, level up. So, yeah, thanks for that, I guess. But Sinister, he has some questions and qualms, but he kind of just keeps them to himself. But we do find out that he is working against Apocalypse with his own ends. He's been funneling information out to the people of Europe to kind of give them a heads up as to what's happening. And there's a couple of couriers who he's employed to do just that, and we get our introduction to Weapon X and Jean Grey, one of the coolest aspects of the Age of Apocalypse, which is a story that's full of very cool aspects. So Wolverine, as I mentioned, he's missing one arm, which is so cool, and also fits with what should be his healing factor, I feel. You can recover from flesh wounds, but you get a limb lopped off, guess that ain't coming back, okay? And Jean, she left the X-Men because Wolverine, once he rescued her, he came back to Magneto and he was like, yo, we're not cool anymore, alright? I shouldn't have had to have done this on my own. So he storms off, and Jean goes with him because, yeah, she does love him, but also she feels like he needs her more than the X-Men do. Because she feels like maybe, as Professor X did in the 616, she needs to keep his berserker rages in check and make sure that he maintains a kind of a level head. And it's kind of nice that there is a flashback scene in a prequel issue where Jean even says to Magneto, she's like, hey, you didn't come rescue me, but I get it. To be honest, you've got responsibilities, and I perhaps wasn't worth the risk. So it's kind of admirable that Jean Grey, she's not salty about him not rescuing her. She's like, no, I get it. That was the smart play. So now she and Wolverine are together, and they're ferrying some highly secretive information over to the governments of Europe. And it's kind of cool that the people that they are delivering this information to are the Trasks, Moira and Bolivar Trask. So Bolivar, who was in charge of the Sentinels in the 616 and one of the biggest enemies of the X-Men, is kind of a, I guess not a good guy, but he's not an antagonist. And Moira McTaggart, is married to him. So yeah, it's all going on here. So back with the X-Men, Magneto and Rogue are going into the mind of Bishop. They do a little Vulcan-style mind meld, and in doing this, Magneto gets these flashes and glimpses of the 616 that give him the full backstory. He gets the entire understanding that the world that they are in is not what it should be. He doesn't know all the finer points, but he knows that something happened, people went back in time, and where they are right now is not what the world is meant to be. This is a fragmented, screwed up version of reality. So even just knowing that is enough to give hope that maybe this world can actually be saved. Of course, while all this is happening, it's getting a little bit crazy and a little bit out of hand, so Gambit, who was hiding in the shadows at the time, jumps in and breaks up this psychic link and also kind of chastises Magneto for putting Rogue in danger, because he was one of the X-Men for a while until, like actually happens in a lot of times and realities, he sees that he doesn't have a chance with Rogue. In the Age of Apocalypse, her heart is with Magneto, so he's like, okay, peace, I'm gonna go sulk somewhere else. Until now. Magneto kind of brushes Gambit off though, because he has his own ideas and agendas, one of which involves getting back in contact with Raven Darkholme, Mystique. So to do that, he dispatches one of the most obvious agents he can do, Nightcrawler. We'll follow his adventures later. Wrapping up Age of Apocalypse Alpha, we go back over to Apocalypse and Nemesis. I'm going to have to bite my tongue with that one. We go back over to Apocalypse and Nemesis as they discuss Sinister, who has just disappeared recently, and what that could mean. Apocalypse kind of brushes it off though, as all arrogant mad dictators do. Little do any of them know though, that it's about to come crashing down for the entire planet as the approach of the Macron crystal is shown on the last page. And again, more on the Macron crystal later. Well, basically, I'll tell you now. It's going to destroy everything when it comes to Earth. There you go. Now we're going to go over to the individual story arcs that make up the AOA. First of all, it's Generation Next, which was quite a risky venture by Marvel because they had only just launched Generation X a couple of months ago, and now just a few issues in, they're completely turning it on its head and making it Generation Next. But we do have a lot of the same cast, and we open with the Generation Next team all battling and training against one another, and you can see they ain't as friendly as they were in the 616, and especially their leader, Colossus. So Colossus is in charge. He's kind of like, not the headmaster, because it doesn't have a school structure, but he's more like a drill sergeant for Generation Next, and he's really angry that they were starting to work together as a team when the point of his exercise was for them to try and defeat each other. That's the kind of guy that they're dealing with now. Colossus is, he's hard to love in this reality. What's easy to love though is the Build-A-Figure that we got from Hasbro. Wave 2 of the Age of Apocalypse, we got this huge, hulking, metallic, awesome looking Colossus Build-A-Figure. Such a great action figure. Wish we could get more, but it seems like the Age of Apocalypse figures didn't sell very well for Hasbro, so after 2 lines, I think that might be it, but I just hope they might pepper in some more figures every now and then, because dang it, some of these are so cool. So with this training exercise getting a little bit out of hand, Magneto shows up and steps in. He's like, okay, pump the brakes, we've got more important things to worry about. Namely, he talks about what he saw in Bishop's mind, and how Professor X was killed when he shouldn't have been, and potentially they can fix this entire reality. But he needs to confirm that this is actually the case. So that's why he had dispatched Nightcrawler and Gambit to go and gather up more evidence? to go and gather up more evidence to corroborate his story. Shadowcat says that that's all well and good, but right now there are no known mutants who have time travel abilities. And Magnus, he's got a bit of hope in him. He says, yes, but I'm sure that there will be ones in the future that we can eventually use and then go back in time. But also, while we're here, let's just have a little chat with our computer knowledge system, this setup they have called Know-It-All, to see if they can scan the world and try to find any alive mutants or anyone with powers who potentially could time travel. And the one that they discover is not what any of them expected. It turns out that Colossus's sister, Illyana, is alive. He thought she was dead, but no. She's alive and well, and even though her time travel powers have not manifested yet, Know-It-All can see that they will eventually. She's located in somewhere in Portland, and now that's the mission for Generation Next, to go rescue Illyana and retrieve, hopefully, their ability to time travel and fix this Age of Apocalypse. Astonishing X-Men issue number 1, Once More with Feeling. This issue opens up with Magneto discussing his plans with his X-Men team, who look awesome with Iceman melding into the wall like that. So cool. He tells them that this is kind of like the end game that they are approaching now, and even though a lot of the X-Men don't necessarily buy into this story that Bishop has, they're willing to follow Magneto. Before he can go any further though, a portal blinks open, and Blink drops through with Sunfire, whose powers are just raging out of control. To try and subdue him, Magneto makes this awesome metal hand come up from the floor to grab hold of him, and Iceman is able to cool him down and put a stop to the flames. Before they can do anything else though, Delgado, one of Apocalypse's henchmen, sticks his head through the portal and gets a good old look at the X-Men's base of operations. Blink snaps the portal shut, but it might be too late, because we do go over to Apocalypse's stronghold in Manhattan, where his little minion Rex tells them that Delgado got a good look at where the X-Men are, and they're this close to finding out exactly where they're located. Back over at the X-Mansion, Gambit tries to steal Rogue away for a little bit of an intimate moment, but before he can do, Blink steps in with baby Charles in her arms, and she's like, "Hey Rogue, before you forget about anything." So you can see that Blink is fervently against Gambit, sort of wheedling his way back into Rogue's affections. Then we get this great little scene between Magneto and Nightcrawler, where Nightcrawler says that he's worried Bishop might be a spy for Apocalypse. Magneto kind of flips that, saying that actually what he's most worried about is that Bishop is actually telling the truth, because he remembers back when Xavier was killed, seeing this person kind of like appear and then disappear, so he knows that there is something going on that Bishop is telling the truth about. In the meantime, to wrap up this issue, Blink and Rogue are preparing a shuttle to fly over to where the human cullings are taking place and put a stop to it, and Quicksilver tells them that he's not confident about their success chances in this mission. Fortunately, Rogue can reassure him that they're being joined by Sabretooth and Wildchild, because Creed, he's got a score to settle with Nemesis, because way back in the day, the two of them worked together as agents of Apocalypse, and there was one mission where they went to steal a bunch of nuclear warheads, and the whole time, Sabretooth is like, "Oh yeah, we're going to be using these as a deterrent, right?" It's like that Attack of the Clones meme. "We're not really going to use these weapons, right?" Right? So, as soon as he finds out that they are actually planning to launch these warheads, Sabretooth rebels and turns against Apocalypse and eventually joins the X-Men. So he and Wildchild are a part of the team, and then rounding out the numbers are Sunfire and Morph as well. So we've got kind of the Age of Apocalypse equivalent of the gold team and the blue team. So one of them's going to go and stop the Cullings, and the other ones we're going to follow in the alternate X book. Now over to Excalibur number 1, the Infernal Gallop. And this issue doesn't leave us in any suspense. It explains exactly what the Infernal Gallop is. This is the Age of Apocalypse equivalent of the Underground Railroad, where they can ferry mutants and humans back and forth between the destructive zones that are controlled by Apocalypse and this area of sanctuary called Avalon. This Avalon is located in the Savage Land, and as the two travelers go to the final destination, they're confronted by kind of the doorman of Avalon, who is this bald, gigantic mountain of a man. It's Cain Marko. So in this reality, he does clearly have the Gem of Cyttorak, but he's actually a pacifist, peaceful monk. So Cain takes this mutant switchback who's just arrived on this journey through the Antarctic to Avalon. Over in the ruins of Manhattan, we find Nightcrawler, who is on his way to Club Heaven to go and meet with Angel. With Angel's connections amongst all the power brokers in New York, he's able to acquire pretty much anything. So Nightcrawler says, "Hey, we need a means of getting to Avalon. I need to go and find this Destiny lady, find out if we can corroborate Bishop's story." After a little bit of a scuffle, Angel does tell Nightcrawler that he can find a man named Proudstar at a nearby warehouse. Going back over to the X-Mansion, Magneto is communicating with Mystique, saying that he needs her to help Nightcrawler get into Avalon so that he can have a meeting with Destiny. Back over in Manhattan, Nightcrawler locates Proudstar, and Proudstar tells him that he's not actually a fan of what Mystique does, because Proudstar sends a whole bunch of mutants and humans who are looking to flee to Mystique so that she can travel them to Avalon, but also she wants a little something for herself, so she has been extorting and kind of blackmailing them to get what she wants before actually taking them to safety. Nightcrawler doesn't really dig this story much, and to kind of put Proudstar in his place, he grabs his finger and then teleports away, thus removing it from his hand. Kind of a dick move, but also sort of a badass power play. So yeah, I kind of dig Nightcrawler in the Age of Apocalypse. Unfortunately, a young lady by the name of Danny Moonstar slinks out of this warehouse meeting because she is actually an agent of Apocalypse, and she goes to tell him about Nightcrawler's plan to get to Avalon and speak to Destiny and find out if there's a way of undoing this whole reality that they're in. Also, when she goes to confront Apocalypse about this, we meet his sidekick, we just meet one of his lackeys, a certain Deadman Wade, who of course is Deadpool of this reality, and yeah, if you think he has it rough in the 616, it's a whole lot worse over here. So Apocalypse dispatches his Pale Riders to go and find Avalon and destroy everyone there. So Nightcrawler joins this submarine, called the Excalibur, appropriately enough, that's taking a whole bunch of refugees to Avalon. And back over there, we find that Kane Marco has introduced Switchback to Destiny. Unfortunately, when Destiny makes contact with Switchback, she gets these visions of Avalon burning. Not an encouraging sign. Now it's time for Gambit and the Externals issue number 1. Some of Us Look to the Stars. The issue opens up with the Infinites pursuing Jubilee, who's stolen medical supplies. Jubilee starts to question to herself if she's actually on the right side of this conflict, wondering why, as a mutant, she doesn't just side with Apocalypse and be one of the master race. But you see, she's good at heart. She ain't gonna do that. Luckily, she does get to live to keep questioning her decisions, as she's rescued by Sunspot and Guido. So you can see Gambit in the Externals is kind of the equivalent of X-Force. So safe again, the three of them get back to their base and distribute the medical supplies. The returning mutants are told that their leader is here and they need to go down and have a meeting with him, and when they do, they are surprised to find Magneto, because they already know that Gambit and Magneto, the X-Men and the Exiles or Externals, they're not really on good terms, so they're ready for a fight. However, fortunately, Gambit, just being the showman that he is, was there the whole time, and he's like, "Hey, relax, mon cher. We all cool here." I shouldn't improvise as Gambit. I never know what to say. He tells them that he and Magneto have actually been cooking up a plan together, and it's going to be up to the Exiles to pull off the jewel heist of the century. We go over now and meet Richter, who is an agent of Apocalypse, and he's chastising his men for making him look bad because he's on high alert right now, since the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse are apparently right here in Manhattan taking a look at his operations. Back with Gambit and the Exiles, Magneto is leading them through the Morlock tunnels, where he's going to take them to one of Apocalypse's science research labs. And during this scene, we actually get a nice look at Gambit's motivations and how he left the X-Men when Rogue married Magneto. But now he's actually falling in love with Lila Cheney, who is a human that is kind of a intermediary between humans and mutants. And she obviously feels very strongly for Gambit as well. Obviously, who could resist, am I right? So she feels that even though she doesn't trust Magneto, she's willing to work with him because she trusts Gambit's intuition. So the Exiles break into this Apocalypse science lab and they discover just the absolutely vast amount of knowledge and resources that Apocalypse has at his disposal. Before they can get a full look at this place, they get attacked by the Madri, who are just an infinite number of Jamie Madrox clones. So you see that this dude's also working for Apocalypse in this reality. The Madri are easily defeated though, and Sunspot finds this guy in the lab, Peter Cordro, who works as the librarian of this huge establishment. So with the assistance of the librarian, the Exiles are able to find out exactly where they need to go to locate this crystal, and it turns out that Lila Cheney is the one who's going to take them there, because she does have a repressed mutant power. So they're able to unlock this, and she can open a vortex that sucks Gambit and the Externals through to where the crystal is located in the cosmos. Before it can close, though, they are attacked by Richter and his troops. So while the troops are easily taken out, Richter is able to jump through the vortex before it closes. So he's there in pursuit of Gambit and the externals. Going over to one of my favourite chapters of the Age of Apocalypse now, it's Weapon X, formerly Wolverine, with the story Unforgiven Trespasses. In this issue, we have Weapon X and Jean Grey, who are on a mission from the Human High Council to get to the Atlantic City sea wall. The station's guards call in an Alpha-class mutant to help with their defenses, and it just so happens to be the grumpier of the two Summers brothers, Havoc. Jean senses Havoc's presence, and Logan's more than happy to have a dust-up with him, but Jean tells him that they need to focus on getting to the control center. Havoc, who was initially kind of annoyed at being called in just to take out a Sentinel, is somewhat pleased to find that there are two Alpha-class mutants waiting for him, so he immediately goes to confront them. While Jean confronts Havoc, Logan's able to get inside the facility and makes expectedly short work of the defenses inside. While Jean's keeping Havoc busy, Logan's able to destroy a huge section of the sea wall, before coming back to the scuffle and taking out Havoc so that he and Jean can make their escape. Outside of the facility, they find not only their Sentinel, but a whole fleet of Sentinels now, all carrying humans to safety. It's a very cool kind of World War II Spirit of the Dam Busters kind of vibe to this. I really, really dig it. Back at Apocalypse's stronghold, Cyclops informs Apocalypse that Sinister has betrayed them, and that he's transported information to the Human High Council. In a rather amusing aside, the four Horsemen question why Weapon X was involved in this scuffle that they're hearing about at the sea wall, and Apocalypse informs them that he will be asking Havoc for a full report. However, he's currently molecularly fused with a Sentinel, so they need to sort that problem out first. We never actually see that, but it's interesting as a little aside, like, oh yeah, Havoc, he's having a bad day. Back in London, Logan and Jean sit in on the Human High Council's briefing session to find out what their plans actually are. Thanks to the information that Sinister gave to the High Council, they're full on preparing to drop a nuclear assault on Apocalypse. Logan finds the possibility of a full-out nuclear war to be perhaps not the best course of action, but before they can even get into that, the mutant Magma attacks. Logan's able to make short work of Magma, however, just this one assault and instance here strengthens the resolve of the Human Council to wipe Apocalypse fully off the map. Amazing X-Men #1, The Crossing Guards. This issue begins with a little flashback. We go back in time 20 years and see Apocalypse first conquering America. We see how many humans were able to escape to Europe and Asia, but a lot of the others were all rounded up and herded into camps and breeding pens. Pretty dark stuff. One of these locations that the people managed to escape from is Booth Bay Harbor. A bunch of the human refugees are met by Copycat, Carlisle, what's her name? We'll go with Copycat, we'll stick with that. And she shows them where to go. Unfortunately, she's not on their side, but she is working as an agent of Apocalypse, and she informs the Madri, the Jamie Madrox clones, that the humans are having this means of escape. We go over to the X-Mansion, where the other team of X-Men who are still at the base are going through a training exercise with a Sentinel, because their upcoming mission is to go and reprogram a whole bunch of Sentinels that will then be used to evacuate a whole bunch of civilians from New York. Just like before, a lot of the X-Men are still questioning the validity and reliability of Magneto's plan with Bishop, but they're willing to follow him, whatever that might be. And then Magneto informs Exodus that he's going to need to use him to transport the X-Men team to Maine, where they can evacuate the humans. The X-Men wait in Maine while Storm destroys the communications tower that's based around it, and man, you realise just how powerful Storm is when you get scenes like this. Meanwhile, the boy who we saw with Copycat earlier gets abducted by some black tendrils we later find out belong to a certain Horseman. The Sentinels arrive and they detect mutants in the local area. Dazzler is able to distract the Sentinels, and the X-Men can then reprogram them to their own ends. The Sentinels, however, aren't fully under the X-Men's control, and they start to go into their own original programming, and before that can be dealt with, the Brotherhood shows up, and things are about to really kick off. But more on that later. Because now we're going to go over to Factor X #1. So this is, of course, what used to be X Factor. And this is a real fun story that chronicles the sibling rivalry of Scott and Alex Summers. I bet the character of Havoc would have been real annoyed that I couldn't remember his name. That's the whole crux of this story. This issue opens with Apocalypse's prelates, who are his kind of royal guard, I suppose, being headlined by Cyclops, and they're in pursuit of a bunch of rogue mutants, who kind of are all versions and equivalents of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants from the 616. In the pursuit, Alex Summers kills one of the fleeing mutants, which Cyclops is angry about because he says, hey, I had this under control, no one had to get killed. That's the cool thing about Cyclops in this reality. Even though he's on the side of the heels, he's still the moral compass that he always was. It's just he was raised by Sinister and taught that you need to be fighting for the mutant race. So even though he's working for Apocalypse, he's still trying to actually negate any kind of violence and destruction wherever he can do. It's great that even though characters can do a 180, they sort of morally haven't as well. It actually fits with the character's mindset, especially someone like Cyclops, who's always got such a strong sense of duty. It's a real great dichotomy that we have in this kind of story. Now we go over and find Sinister, who at this point in time hasn't yet run off from Apocalypse. This is where the time frame jumps around a little bit when you're reading the individual stories back to back. We do, however, find out more about Sinister's motivation. His biggest problem that he has is he can see that Apocalypse is going too far and goading the human race into just wiping him out with nuclear weapons. So he doesn't feel objections towards the horrors that Apocalypse is doing. It's just that he knows it's literally going to blow up in their faces. And he's put too much work into his genetic manipulation and fostering and shaping the future to see it all destroyed. Cyclops returns the escaped prisoners to the pens, while Havoc goes to have a meeting with the Dark Beast where they flesh out their own little goals and motivations as well. Cyclops goes to find Sinister, but is shocked to find that he's actually left already. Havoc and the Bedlam brothers go to Angel's nightclub Heaven, but when they get there, the whole place is attacked by an anti-mutant terrorist group headed up by someone who looks rather familiar. They have explosives all strapped to their bodies and they're going to hold the club hostage. The Bedlam brothers easily take these guys out though, and the human singer at the club, Scarlet, thanks them before going to have a little liaison with someone else. And we find out that Scarlet is currently embroiled in a human-mutant love affair with Havoc. On their way out of the club, the Bedlam brothers tease Havoc about the potential affair he might be having, and he gets real testy about it. Luckily, before they can throw down, they're confronted by Cyclops. Cyclops, Havoc, and the Bedlam brothers go to investigate Sinister's lab, and when they get there, they find it completely destroyed. So with Sinister gone for good, the Bedlam brothers suggest that Cyclops should be in charge. Though as you can imagine, Havoc isn't really behind this idea. And the issue ends with Apocalypse overseeing an explosion that is somehow going to turn brother against brother. Now it's time for X-Man #1 and the story breaking away. We open with X-Man having this dream sequence where he meets Cyclops and he sees the ruins of the Xavier mansion, and he's starting to have these issues and images of what's happening in the future or the past or the present. Essentially, his psychic powers are just so powerful, he really can't control them. Fortunately, he's woken up from his dream state by the Age of Apocalypse version of Forge. Forge is accompanied by a bunch of mutants who pose as this acting troupe who travel from place to place putting on Shakespearean plays. Not the most obvious Age of Apocalypse switcheroo, but hey, some characters take some interesting directions. So the idea is they travel around under the guise of being performers, but they actually use that as cover for destroying some of Apocalypse's smaller operations. The group are confronted by some of Apocalypse's prelates, and X-Man uses his powers to overcome them, at which point Forge says, hey look, that was all cool and whatnot, but if you use your powers too much, we're gonna get found out. We go over to find Apocalypse, who has been informed by the Shadow King, his magic lava lamp, that X-Man exists, he's out there on the run, and potentially where they can find him. We see the Shadow King as well, and in the Age of Apocalypse, this terrifying psychic entity is reduced to this little brain in a jar, which Apocalypse uses for his precognitive sort of tasks. He's basically a magic 8-ball, is what he's been reduced to. Also, funnily enough, there's an action figure of the Shadow King. Toy Biz made a very basic Age of Apocalypse line way back in the mid-90s, and you could get Apocalypse with removable armor and swappable saw hand along with this little Shadow King accessory. I always thought that was really cool. He looks like a funky lava lamp. So Apocalypse rounds up his team of mercenaries led by Domino with the orders to go and locate X-Man and either recruit him or kill him. In the meantime, a character called Teresa is being harassed by some of Apocalypse's forces, and she gets rescued by Forge and his band. In the fight, X-Man gets in trouble, and Teresa is able to manifest a psychic power she didn't know that she had. She saves X-Man, and Nate insists that the troop bring her along with them. Later, the travelers find another mysterious companion along the road, a gentleman by the name of Essex. No prizes for guessing who this is. Now it's time to go over to X-Men number 2 with the title Sacrificial Lambs. This issue opens with the Horsemen of Apocalypse Abyss toying with the kidnapped child that we saw from... was it Excalibur that we saw the kid get snatched? There's a lot of crossovers here. It's difficult for the brain to keep track of, but yeah, Abyss snatching kids and making them cry, brah. That's some heel moves right there. So we see the X-Men confronted by the Brotherhood of Chaos. So not the Brotherhood of Mutants, but the Brotherhood of Chaos. And their job is to stop the X-Men from launching this Sentinel evacuation. The human evacuation is being led by Quicksilver. Unfortunately, the Madri have planted some spies in there with them alongside Copycat, so already this might be doomed to failure. Copycat is able to get the drop on Pietro by disguising herself as Wanda, and in his confusion, she's able to shoot him. So of course a whole huge fight breaks out, and Banshee ends up locating Abyss. And Abyss still has this kidnapped kid inside his coils and tendrils, and he tells Banshee to get out of here because he doesn't want to fight him. Abyss wants to get his hands on Quicksilver, and he's going to use the kid as leverage. Banshee is able to locate Quicksilver, who, yes, was shot by Copycat, but not fatally. Come on, he's got some plot armor on, it's okay. So while Quicksilver goes off to confront Abyss, Banshee helps reprogram the Sentinels and get their human evacuation back on track. So Quicksilver and Storm confront Abyss, and they're able to both rescue the child and destroy Abyss, as Quicksilver kind of tricks and manipulates him into getting his head stuck in his own vortex, and he just sort of consumes himself into a black hole. It's kind of cool. So Quicksilver and Storm are able to reunite the child with his parents. It's kind of a surprisingly sweet moment in the Age of Apocalypse, and we see the Sentinels ferrying all these humans to safer places around the world in Europe and Asia. Back over at Apocalypse's base, though, Karma is being interrogated with regards to Magneto's base and the security defenses around it. Sebastian Shaw is overseeing this, and he knows that Karma has had these interactions with Gambit and Angel, so she's going to be able to tell him what he needs to know. And the issue ends with Apocalypse confident now that he's ready to face Magneto on his home turf, and they can find out who truly is the fittest. Now it's time for Factor X number 2, and the sibling rivalry between Cyclops and Havoc starts to bubble. We open up with a rather tragic scene where Magneto appears in Apocalypse's prison camp, and he's there to rescue 2 mutants. But while he's there, there's a third one who begs for him to rescue her too, and that turns out to be Polaris, who is convinced and believes that Magneto is her father. Magneto says that he'd love nothing more than to take everyone with him, but then the risks of being discovered are too great, so he regretfully leaves Polaris there crying in the prison camp. That was a tough scene. Over with Apocalypse, and Cyclops and Havoc go to tell him that Sinister has disappeared, and this causes Apocalypse to fly into a rage. Mainly because he's been given this information about 5 times already in this story. Or at least we of the readers have, but hey, that's what happens when you read everything. One thing that's kind of cool though is that Apocalypse notices that even in his anger, Cyclops doesn't flinch. He certainly doesn't blink, and that's just Scott Summers being the badass that he is. So Cyclops and Havoc then go over to Apocalypse's prisons, and Havoc is still plotting the downfall of his brother in the back of his mind. And when they get there, he goes to meet the Guthries. So Havoc and the Guthries bring Polaris in for questioning, and she still swears that Magneto is her father, but she's being rather incoherent, and Havoc, just in frustration, actually knocks her out, and then they throw her to the Beast. And he says that the Dark Beast needs to try and scrape her brain for whatever information he can get. Again, just real nasty villainous stuff from people who are usually the good guys. The Beast discovers that Magneto definitely isn't her father, and that her parents were killed in the original Cullings, but she was spared when her powers manifested, and it was actually later she had a confrontation with Rogue, and in that fight Rogue took her memory, and that's why she doesn't remember how she got here. In the meantime, Cyclops meets with the Bedlam brothers, and they manage to confirm that Sinister had a secret lab inside the giant Apocalypse statue. I thought it was just made of chocolate. While they're there, Angel swoops down to let them know that he's heard rumours that there's going to be a full-scale war between Apocalypse's forces and Europe, and Warren Worthington, being somewhat self-interested, says how this for him could only be bad for business. Now we get some real personal drama. We see Alex Summers along with Scarlet, of course the singer from Angel's Heaven nightclub. They've got their human-mutant affair going on, and Havoc is kind of lamenting to himself how satisfying it will be to do away with his brother and be Apocalypse's favourite. And in the meantime, Scarlet's kind of, egging him along with this plan, but also it's revealed that she is actually a secret spy for the Human High Council, and now she's starting to feel conflicted because she's genuinely falling in love with Havoc. Chicks dig jerks. Back at the pens, Cyclops is angered to discover Beast doing all these experiments on Polaris, and he chastises him, telling him that this is the kind of stuff that's going to bring this situation with Europe to a head. That's the great little bit of characterization with Cyclops. Again, he's working for the bad guys, but he's doing it with noble intentions. Later that night, Polaris is rescued by a mysterious stranger, who she is still convinced is Magneto. But this hooded person, who in no way could be Cyclops, helps her escape from the prison, but before they can get out, they are confronted by Northstar and Aurora. Polaris's mysterious rescuer is able to fight them off, but little do they know that they're being pursued by Havoc. To the surprise of no one, the mysterious figure reveals himself to be Cyclops, and this comes much to the delight of Havoc, who now has all the evidence he needs to overthrow his brother. Now it's back over to Wolverine and Jean for Weapon X number 2, Fire in the Sky. The issue opens with some beautiful Adam Kubert artwork showing the Sentinel airlift, where they've taken all these refugees from America and are delivering them on the shores of England. Again, some real World War II type vibes here. And amidst all the chaos of the immigration and all the people registering, we've got Wolverine, or Weapon X, running through the crowd, desperately trying to find Jean. During all of this immigration, there are 3 characters who are blending in with the rest of the crowd, but are drawing suspicion from the eyes of the reader. And these are the same people who sequestered themselves in with the refugees back in Amazing X-Men. So there are little Easter eggs and things dropped between the different titles. And you know that these guys, they're only going to be bad news. One of them, Pierce, recognizes Weapon X, and instantly they launch an attack, with the other 2 revealing themselves to be Copycat and Vox? With the other 2 being Copycat and a third one whose name I forget. The attack reminds Jean of her times in Apocalypse's slave pens, and this trauma causes Weapon X to go into a berserker rage, and he makes short work of the villains. This attack further reinforces Wolverine's belief, I'm just going to keep calling him Wolverine, you know who I mean, that it reinforces his belief that the right thing to do is this nuclear attack on Apocalypse. However, Jean is still very much against this, and you can see the wedge being drawn between them. Wolverine has a discussion with Lady Mariko, who of course we all know from his 616 past, about the pros and cons essentially of bombing North America. And while she says that it's not something that she wants to do, she appreciates that they really have no option at this point. Interrupting this moment though, Donald Pierce and his pretty boys, essentially the Reavers of this world, attack the airship that they're on. This attack was designed to destroy the guidance systems for the nuclear missiles and was successful, but that wasn't going to stop Weapon X from trying to make these guys pay. So he has this incredible baller moment where he dives through the flames and the wreckage to get to Donald Pierce, and there's actually an action figure of the burnt up crispy Weapon X that Toy Biz made. It was an alternate to their usual one. Kind of cool that you can get the Freddy Krueger version of Weapon X. So he takes out Donald Pierce, and even in that moment he has a little moment of clarity to himself where he thinks, you know, I could just let myself burn here and be done with all this pain and suffering, but hey, you know what? That ain't the Logan way. Of course, what really snapped him out of this melancholy state was a message from Jean psychically saying goodbye to him, and he realizes that he has to try and catch up with her quickly, which he does. He jumps on his bike to see her, and she's commandeered a plane and is about to fly over to warn people about the nuclear assault that's coming. And Wolverine's like, yo, I can't let you go, I can't let you do this. And she plays her trump card. She says, well, you're gonna have to kill me then, which of course causes Logan to relent. He gets off the plane and lets her fly away, and now that's the end of their partnership until the final issue. And that's the end of part 1 of Age of Apocalypse as told by Toys. I was really hoping to get this whole thing done in one mega video, but I've had some technical snafus and I didn't want to sit on this for too long. So this was part 1 and part 2 will be following soon. I promise. But I hope that you enjoyed this start to the Age of Apocalypse. I've had a blast going through this story again, and I just wanted to do it justice by not rushing it. So expect part 2 coming very, very soon. But probably not as soon as I know that a lot of you would like, but I'm working as fast as I can. But gang, thank you so much for watching. Apologies for the half-done little finish here, but I gotta get this video up. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep displaying model behavior.